Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. In this week's video, we're continuing with session number 5 of our new series entitled Cumulative Trauma and the QME. And I have an eye-opening session for you today, one that is certainly going to open your eyes as to where your cumulative trauma cases are coming to you from. And also, I want to share with you some actual cases that illustrate how the courts perceive cumulative trauma injury claims and how those cases are handled in the courts. It seems that the courts have quite a liberal construction philosophy when it comes to the handling of cumulative trauma injury claims. So I have a fascinating discussion for you today, but before we get into the topics of today's discussion, let's just quickly review where we've come from so far in sessions 1 through 4 of this program. In session 1, we talked about what it is that actually qualifies as an injury in the California workers' compensation system. It seems that an injury conclusion or an injury determination is actually quite a high threshold in California workers' compensation. To qualify as an injury in California, your examinee must first have a bona fide, diagnosable, and symptomatic condition. The word that's described in law is condition. So the examinee must have a bona fide, symptomatic, and diagnosable condition before they can be construed as having an injury. Now, simply the presence of a condition does not convey an injury, as injury is defined in the California workers' compensation system. The condition, in order to qualify as an injury, the condition must either cause, number one, disability, and or a need for medical treatment. And many examinees present to us with conditions that are non-disabling and that do not require or are not expected to respond to medical treatment. So those conditions do not rise to the level of an injury as injury is defined in the California workers' compensation system. So we spent quite a great deal of time in session number 1 talking about what actually qualifies, first of all, as an injury, and then secondly, how to determine if the injury qualifies as an industrial injury, a compensable industrial injury in the California workers' compensation system. And then in session number 2, we talked about the very important concepts related to the dates of injury for both specific injury claims and cumulative trauma injury claims. And the dates of injury for specific injury claims are defined very tightly in Labor Code 5411, and it's very cut and dry and black and white with regards at least to specific injury claims. But on the other hand, cumulative trauma injury claims, the date of injury for those types of claims is described under Labor Code 5412. And because of loopholes and soft language, liberal language in the language of Labor Code 5412, cumulative trauma injury claims can be filed days, weeks, months, years, and even decades after an employee has separated his or her relationship from the employer, and it has to do with the language described in Labor Code 5412. Then we talked about reporting of claims and what actually constitutes a bona fide reporting of an injury claim. And remember, from that session we explained that the burden for reporting an injury claim lands upon the injured employee. In our case, it lands upon the examinee. And it's Labor Code 5400 that describes a tight and rigid and very well defined criteria for what constitutes bona fide reporting of an injury claim. But then Labor Code 5402 and what qualifies and how reporting is described in the law is described in Labor Codes 5400 to 5403. In 5402, the language for what constitutes a bona fide reporting of an industrial injury becomes greatly softened compared to how that is described in Labor Code 5400, such that almost any reference, inference, implication, suggestion by an employee that they're not doing well on the job site could constitute bona fide reporting of the industrial injury under Labor Code 5402. So it's important for us as qualified medical evaluators to understand the language in these two sections of the Labor Code, because as we sit face to face with examinees during the QME evaluation, examinees will tell us or will describe to us how they reported the industrial injury. And what they're doing when they relay this reporting to us is they're demonstrating to us their compliance either with 5400 or with 5402, and most likely and most generally they comply with the requirements of 5402, which, as I stated earlier, are very, very soft and very, very liberal and give great benefit of doubt to the injured employee. That background from sessions number 1 and sessions number 2 brought us to session number 3, where we introduced the extremely relevant topic of the post-employment cumulative trauma injury claims under Labor Code 3600. And this has to do with the large numbers of cases that we as qualified medical evaluators get assigned to evaluate for denied claims for allegations of cumulative trauma when that allegation is filed post-employment, meaning after the employee has separated his or her relationship from the employer, either at the employer's initiation, in other words, the employee was either terminated or laid off, in other words, the employer initiated the separation, or even in those circumstances where the employee has initiated the separation from the employer, such as when the employee quits, such as when the employee retires, such as when the employee goes on a sabbatical, etc. The employee could take a leave of absence, okay, etc. But in general, remember that the law, Labor Code 3600, generally bans, bars, prohibits, blocks, and prevents the filing of injury claims post-employment. These claims are generally barred by law. However, there are some exceptions in Labor Code 3600 that do allow these claims, even though they're filed post-employment, that do allow these claims to fly, that do allow these claims to become accepted claims. And the reasons for those exceptions that allow the claims to fly is to protect bona fide and actual injured workers who have suffered bona fide actual incidences of industrial injury, but who, for whatever reason, and there's 1,000 reasons in the big city, for whatever reason, they either failed or neglected or omitted or forgot to file their claim during the period of time when they were within the employment relationship. So we spent a great deal of time talking about post-employment claims. In our last session, we illustrated some of the principles in sessions 1 through 3 by reviewing some actual case examples. We reviewed the Wagner case, the Wright case, and the Rodarty case to illustrate principles as to how the courts handle disputes over the presence or absence of an industrial injury for claims for cumulative trauma injury allegations. And remember that the date of injury for a cumulative trauma claim is the date upon which two events coincide. Number one is the date that the employee first suffered disability. And the second is the date upon which the employee first gained the knowledge that the disability was due to the workplace duties. So we have these two factors, these two dates, and when those two dates coincide, that becomes the date of injury for the cumulative trauma injury claim. And this is a critical date relevant for the administration of the claim, because many times these dates deal with separate and distinct insurers or different claims payers. And so it's important in determining who's liable for the employee's benefits. The date of injury is critical to determine, and we reviewed how the courts handle these issues, how they handle determining when is the date that the employee first suffered disability, when is the date that the employee first gained the knowledge or should have gained the knowledge, and then therefore when is the date when these two coincided. And these cases illustrated several different permutations of those variables. Now in today's session, I want to share with you some statistics that are known, some current statistics about cumulative trauma injury claims that will illustrate to you where it is that your cumulative trauma injury claims are coming to you from, and what type of employee is likely, most likely now, at least as far as the current statistics are known, what type of employee is most likely to file a claim for cumulative trauma injury, especially a post-employment type of cumulative trauma injury allegation. So I have some statistics to share with you, and then I want to share with you a specific case, the Robinson case, that shows how the courts handle qualified medical evaluators and qualified medical evaluators' opinions, either for or against industrial cumulative trauma injury when the AOE-COE determination is the issue in dispute. It seems that the courts generally apply a very liberal construction. All of the laws are very liberally construed to favor providing benefits to employees who claim cumulative trauma injuries. And the Robinson case is a very chilling example of how the courts handle those disputes. So I have a fascinating discussion I want to share with you today. And so with that as our introduction, let's begin today's session, which is session number 5 of our ongoing series of cumulative trauma and the QME. Okay, so let's begin. And I want to begin by sharing with you some statistics that have been published by the Workers' Compensation Institute Review Board in their recent 2019 publication entitled The World of Cumulative Trauma Injury Claims. Now, this video is being recorded in 2021, and the report from the WCIRB is dated 2019. Well, at the time of the 2019 publication of this study, those statistics were the most recent statistics on cumulative trauma injury claims. And it takes many, many years for statistics on cumulative trauma injury claims to be aggregated and collected because of the nature of cumulative trauma injury claims, which can be filed many years even after the date of injury. So it takes many, many years to compile and compose and comprise statistics on any given year, and the 2019 statistics are the most current that we have available as of this writing. And as we talked about in session number 1 of this program, cumulative trauma injury claim rates, the rate of filing of cumulative trauma injury claims, has grown by approximately 50% in the 11 years between 2008 and the publication of the 2019 study by the WCIRB, 50%. So imagine this. Imagine that in 2008 there were 100,000 claims for cumulative trauma injury filed in 2008. Well, by 2019, that number had grown to 150,000, a 50% increase. Or if it was 200,000, the number of claims filed had increased by 50% to 300,000. So I don't actually know the actual numbers of claims filed. I'm not sure that is known. I didn't run across that number in the WCIRB study, but the point is that there's thousands and thousands of claims filed every year, thousands and thousands of claims for cumulative trauma injury filed every year, and that number has increased by 50%. So that represents many, many, many more thousands and thousands of cumulative trauma injury claims being filed in 2019 compared to 2008. So what's changed? What has contributed to the dramatic uptick in the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims? Well, according to the WCIRB, all, it says all of this 50% increase, all of this recent CT claim growth is located in two specific areas within the entire state of California. It's located in the Los Angeles and San Diego regions, which are responsible for all of this 50% increase in the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims. In other words, San Francisco is not filing more claims for cumulative trauma injury in 2019 than they were filing in 2008. San Jose, Fresno, Redding in the north, Santa Cruz along the coastline, none of these regions in California are filing cumulative trauma injury claims at any greater rate 11 years later in 2019 compared to 2008. But Los Angeles and San Diego counties have had a dramatic increase in the number of cumulative trauma injury claims filed. So for you qualified medical evaluators in Southern California regions, this explains why your phone is ringing off the hook for evaluations for allegations of cumulative trauma. And most of these allegations of cumulative trauma are for claims that are filed post-employment after the employee has separated his or her relationship from the employer. Okay, so the hotspots for cumulative trauma injury. The hotspots for the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims seem to be in Los Angeles and in San Diego counties. And I have here a chart, and this is adapted from the WCIRB study. I have a chart here that depicts some of the growth in the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims by region. By region meaning within the specific area of the state of California. And we have four regions to talk about. Number one is the San Francisco Bay Area. Number two is Los Angeles County. Number three is San Diego County. And then number four is all other regions in the state, which is typically representing the rural regions of the state of California. So this is an aggregate summation of numbers considering the rural regions within the state of California. So if we look at the rural regions within the state of California, approximately in 2008, all the regions of California were contributing approximately about 6%. 6% of the claims filed for industrial injury were cumulative trauma injury claims. And you can see that between the time period 2008 and 2016, that frequency of claim filing rate for cumulative trauma injuries is relatively constant, ending up here at just slightly below 6%. So not much change, but perhaps a slight decrease over the last 8 years. Okay, so that's the rural regions of California. Now, next is the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area in 2008, representing approximately 8%. 8% of all claims filed are for allegations of cumulative trauma injury. And then through 2016, that rate is relatively unchanged. So rural regions, San Francisco Bay Area regions, have an unchanged rate of filing of cumulative trauma injury claims. And you might scratch your head about that, and you might say to yourself, well, San Francisco Bay Area is a hugely populated region within the state of California. Is the filing of claims in any way related to the population density? Well, similar to the Bay Area, which has a heavy population density, both Los Angeles and San Diego counties are highly populous regions within the state of California. And unlike the Bay Area, which has a relatively flat rate of filing of cumulative trauma injury claims, San Diego County in 2008 had approximately 9% of claims filed were for cumulative trauma injury, but here in 2016, you can see that that's up to about 13%. 13%, an increase of 4%, which represents thousands and thousands more claims for cumulative trauma injury filed in 2016 than in 2008. So you might scratch your head and say, well, what's changed? What's changed? Similarly, and even more eye-opening, is that Los Angeles County, similar to San Diego County in 2008, had approximately 9% of all claims filed included an allegation of cumulative trauma injury. In 2016, that number is well above 15%. Of all claims filed include an allegation of a cumulative trauma type of injury. A dramatic increase, and look at the separation of these graphs from, say, the Bay Area's graph, or even more dramatically, from all regions in California averaged out. There's a dramatic increase and upswing in the numbers of thousands and thousands of claims being filed in San Diego and Los Angeles counties. Okay, so we know that all of the increase in the frequency of filing of cumulative trauma injury claims is coming from the Los Angeles and San Diego counties. So in these particular counties, who is it that's filing these claims for cumulative trauma injury? Well, that information is very well detailed in the 2019 WCIRB study entitled The World of Cumulative Trauma Injury Claims. According to the WCIRB, the recent CT claim growth is spread across many industries, and that makes sense, across many industries in these areas in Los Angeles and San Diego County. However, the manufacturing and hospitality sectors have experienced the most significant growth rates. So it's these particular industries, the manufacturing industry and the hospitality industry, such as hotel workers, such as amusement park workers, that are exploding with the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims. Now, even within these sectors, it's known that the growth is concentrated in lower wage workers. And a lower wage worker is a worker who is considered to have an average weekly wage, AWW, average weekly wage, below $500 per week. It seems that lower wage earners, those that are earning less than $500 per week, are filing cumulative trauma injury claims more than workers that have higher average weekly wages. So it's the lower wage workers that are filing these claims. And about 40% of the recent cumulative trauma injury claims, these are filed after the employee is terminated. In other words, after the employer has either laid off or fired the employee. 40% of the cumulative trauma injury claims are going to be coming to us as qualified medical evaluators as post-employment cumulative trauma injury claims. And if you're watching this discussion today, I know that at least 5 of your last 10 evaluations have involved post-employment cumulative trauma injury claims. If you'll take the effort, time, and inquiry during your face-to-face interview with your examinee, you can quickly determine that the employee is no longer working for the employer and that the claim has been filed long after the employee has separated his or her relationship with the employer. Now, of these post-employment cumulative trauma injury claims, about 3/4 of those are initially denied either in part or in whole, meaning that perhaps one of the body parts is accepted where several of the claimed body parts are denied. So they're denied either in part or in whole, and about 1/4, the other quarter, also involve an accompanying specific injury claim. So if 40% of these claims, these post-employment, 40% of the cumulative trauma injury claims are filed post-employment, 1/4 of them are filed within 1 year of the date of separation, of the date of termination, of the date of layoff, because the specific injury claim has a 1-year statute of limitations. So about 1/4 of these, if they involve an allegation of a specific incident of injury, those have to be filed within 1 year from the date of the injury, the alleged date of injury. So these are claims filed within 1 year of the termination or separation. The other 3/4 can be filed at any point, at any point following the separation. And if there is no specific injury allegation, because the specific injury is barred by the statute of 1-year limitation, tells us that 3/4 of these claims are generally filed more than 1 year, after the separation of the employee from the employer. And here is a chart that depicts exactly that phenomenon. What we have here are the various industry sectors in the Los Angeles and San Diego counties, such as agriculture, construction, manufacturing, real estate, administrative services, hospitality, clerical, etc. And what this chart shows, and this is from the 2019 WCIRB study, is it shows the ratio of claims that are filed for cumulative trauma compared to specific injury claims. And for the manufacturing sector, you can see here that the cumulative trauma injury claims exceed claims filed for specific injury claims. And this chart, compared to a chart in 2008, this is the 2015 chart, when we compare this to a chart in 2008, there's tremendous growth here in this column, Similarly, in the hospitality industry, we see cumulative trauma injury claims actually exceeding specific injury claims as well, with a great increase in this quantity of claims comparing 2015 to 2018. Now, other sectors such as administrative services also exceed specific injury claims. Most of the others, we see that the specific injury claims exceed the cumulative trauma injury claims for most industries in the Los Angeles and San Diego counties. The rate of filing of cumulative trauma injury claims is either equal to specific injury claims or slightly is behind the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims. But in manufacturing and hospitality, both industries show recent increase in the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims. And we know that these particular industries have lower wage workers. Okay, so let's summarize some of this data. And if you're a qualified medical evaluator somewhere in the state of California, when it comes time to evaluating your next cumulative trauma injury claim, who is it that's going to be sitting across from you in the face-to-face evaluation as your examinee? Well, as we said, cumulative trauma injury claim growth in Southern California is concentrated disproportionately in the lower wage workers, those workers that have an average weekly wage of less than $500. So you're going to be sitting across a relatively low wage earner if you're in Southern California. Now, in San Diego County and in Los Angeles County, cumulative trauma injury claim rates have increased across all wage groups because Los Angeles and San Diego County is seeing an explosion across all industries and across all wage groups. However, most significantly, for the low wage income earner, the low average weekly wage earner, those with average weekly wages below $500. So I want you to think of the type of examinee that you could be evaluating at your next evaluation. It's typically going to involve a worker in manufacturing and or hospitality industries who are low average weekly wage earners, typically in the hotel industry, in the manufacturing and assembly industry. I've had recent examinees who are involved in assembling circuit boards, injured workers involved in assembling piping conduits for construction groups, etc. And so these are low average weekly wage earners. Now, in other regions of California, such as in Northern California, the largest ratios of CT claims are not in the lower wage workers, but in the higher wage workers, those with weekly wages of over $1,000. So this is $4,000 per month or greater income earners are filing cumulative trauma injury claims in other regions of California. So you might say this represents the white collar workers, whereas in Los Angeles and San Diego counties, we're sitting across from examinees in the face-to-face evaluation who are more the blue collar, what we would call blue collar types of workers. Now in Northern California, we're most likely going to be seeing a white collar worker for a cumulative trauma injury claim. But again, all wage groups outside of Los Angeles and San Diego counties, the rate of filing of cumulative trauma injury claims is declining. So your cumulative trauma business and your cumulative trauma evaluations outside of Los Angeles and San Diego County are going to be diminishing. And those, when you do get a case, it's likely that you're going to be dealing with a white collar worker outside of the blue collar industries of manufacturing and or hospitality. Okay? So these statistics give us great insight into the psychology of the examinee that we're going to be seeing in our very next evaluation that involves an allegation of cumulative trauma. Now, when it comes time for you as the qualified medical evaluator to opine on the critical issues such as AOE, COE, such as permanent impairment, such as an apportionment, approximate percentages determination, the courts handle these cumulative trauma injury claims very liberally to provide benefits to those claiming cumulative trauma injury. And I want to share with you now an actual case wherein the qualified medical evaluator was perhaps somewhat confounded by concepts related to cumulative trauma injury, as many of us are. It seems that some doctors and qualified medical evaluators specifically have some challenge in wrapping their mind around the concept of a cumulative trauma injury. So I want to share with you an actual case example to show you some of these choke points that qualified medical evaluators confront when it comes time to provide their opinions and conclusions on these cases. So I want to share with you now the Robinson versus it is the City of Riverside case, which involved an allegation of cumulative trauma injury. Okay, so in the Robinson versus City of Riverside case, Robinson was a police officer and he worked for the City of Riverside Police Department for many, many years. And Robinson filed claim for a specific injury to the lumbar spine and a cumulative trauma injury to multiple body parts, including the neck or cervical spine, the upper extremities plural, and the lower extremities plural. So this is basically almost the entirety of the skeleton: the neck, the lumbar spine, the upper extremities, and the lower extremities. And the qualified medical evaluator opined for specific injury to the lumbar spine, because that was the one part of the body claimed for a specific injury. Remember, some of our statistics that we reviewed just a moment ago was that 1/4 of all claims filed for cumulative trauma injury involve an allegation also of a specific incident of injury, and this Robinson case exactly fit that particular paradigm. So the QME, however, opined against industrial cumulative trauma injury to the cervical spine, to the upper extremities, and to the lower extremities. And based upon the qualified medical evaluator's opinion against cumulative trauma injury, the workers' compensation judge then provided benefits for the lumbar spine, but denied injury to the neck, the upper extremities, and the lower extremities on a cumulative trauma basis. Okay, and so let's read directly from this case to see if we can gain some understanding about some of these principles related to cumulative trauma injuries. So the applicant, meaning Mr. Robinson, he sought a reconsideration of the findings and award issued by the workers' compensation law judge, wherein the judge found that the applicant did indeed sustain a specific incident of injury to his lumbar spine, but that he did not sustain cumulative trauma injury to the neck, to the upper extremities, and the lower extremities. And the applicant contends that the medical report of the qualified medical evaluator was not substantial medical evidence, because it appears that the qualified medical evaluator does not understand the concept of cumulative trauma injuries. And this is going to be illustrative for us and for you in particular if you sometimes struggle with some of these concepts related to cumulative trauma injuries and sometimes struggle in providing your opinions and conclusions. So let's see how this case unfolded. Okay, so in order to understand some of the difficulty that the qualified medical evaluator was having in the Robinson case, let's go back to the legal definition of what constitutes a cumulative trauma injury. And that's defined for us in Labor Code 3208.1. 3208.1 tells us that a specific incident of injury occurs as a result of one incident or one exposure which causes disability or the need for medical treatment. Okay, so operative here is that the incident, the injury, must cause either disability and or a need for medical treatment. And the same applies also to a cumulative trauma injury, that it must cause disability or the need for medical treatment. But unlike a specific incident of injury, a cumulative trauma injury occurs as a result of repetitive, mentally or physically traumatic activities extending over a period of time. And Robinson was claiming that he had suffered repetitive, physically traumatic activities extending over a period of time. Now, the case isn't clear to us as to how this exposure, this repetitive, physically traumatic exposure, caused a disability. And it's not clear as to what type of medical treatment Mr. Robinson incurred or Mr. Robinson needed. But what's operative for us and what's relevant for us, that inherent within the definition of a cumulative trauma injury is that there must be repetitive, physically traumatic activities over a period of time. Now, this sounds a lot like working, especially in manufacturing, especially in hospitality, especially in certainly the blue-collar industries, and even in the white-collar industries, with repetitive activities. When you consider a 40-hour work week, months and months and years at the same type of work, physically demanding work, Eventually, just the act of working can result in a disability and or a need for medical treatment. So what constitutes a cumulative trauma injury is an entire open universe of activities can result in a cumulative trauma injury claim if it can be shown that those activities result in either disability and or a need for medical treatment. So this is the Labor Code legal definition of a cumulative trauma injury, and this has been interpreted very specifically and repeatedly by case law to further develop what constitutes a cumulative trauma injury, which is operative in this Robinson versus City of Riverside case. So in the Robinson versus City of Riverside case, the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board, as we're going to see, cites both the legal definition of cumulative trauma injury under Labor Code 3208.1, and they also make reference to a 1968 case entitled Fruhoff Corporation versus Stanton. And all the way back in 1968, the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board defined what constitutes a cumulative trauma injury. So let's read from this Fruhoff Corporation case. They tell us that for the purposes of discussion, we observe that compensable injuries under the workmen's compensation law generally fall into four basic categories. Number one, specific injuries incurred as the result of one incident or exposure in the employment, the effects of which are immediately realized or realizable. And according to Labor Code 3208.1, those effects must involve either disability and or a need for medical treatment. Those are the effects of that incident of exposure. Number two, industrial injuries suffered as a result of a specific incident or exposure, but which have latent effects. And then number three, continuous cumulative traumatic injuries, such as that involved here, suffered as the result of a number of minor strains over a period of time. The result of a number of minor strains over a period of time. Now it would seem, and it's not elaborated here in this discussion, but it would seem that a series of minor strains would constitute a group of specific incidences of injury. So this is a number of specific incidences over time that result in a continuous cumulative traumatic activity sufficient to constitute a cumulative trauma injury. Now this concept of whether or not these are the result of specific and identifiable minor strains or simply the result of an accumulation of unidentifiable generalized aches and pains and overwork syndromes is going to be elaborated on in the Robinson case, as we'll see. And then also finally, cumulative injuries such as silicosis resulting from continuous exposure to harmful substances. So let's see how the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board integrated these two definitions of cumulative trauma injury into the final decision regarding Robinson. So let's read directly from the case now. The case tells us that Mr. Robinson claimed injury to his neck, his upper extremities, his lumbar spine, and his lower extremities while employed as a police officer during the period from June 15, 2009 through 2016, a period of 7 years. On March 1st, applicant was evaluated by the qualified medical evaluator. Qualified medical evaluator examined the applicant, took a history, and reviewed the medical record. And in his report, the doctor stated, when speaking with the patient today, he could not recall any specific episodes that took place during that time period. Okay, so Mr. Robinson is not identifying any specific series of minor strains. He's generally describing the cumulative aggregation of his symptoms as a result of his workplace duties. But he did document that over the past 20 plus years as a peace officer, being involved in multiple motor vehicle accidents and multiple altercations with assailants. Now, Mr. Robinson wasn't alleging that he suffered symptoms as a result of any of the motor vehicle accidents, and he didn't have any specific altercation with an assailant that resulted in a specific incident of injury. He documents having to chase after individuals, climbing over walls, and performing jumping activities, and states for the most part that he continued to work and fight through some of his symptoms so that he could continue to perform his daily work activity. So this seems to suggest here an absence of disability. Okay, so part of the definition of an injury is that it involves either disability or a need for medical treatment. So here it describes perhaps an absence of disability, and there's no mention of any need for medical treatment. So the doctor, the qualified medical evaluator, concluded that this examinee has multiple complaints involving his neck and back as well as his upper extremities and his knees. However, at this point in time, there does not appear to be any clear link between his musculoskeletal difficulties involving his neck, his upper extremities, or his knees as it relates to his work activities for the city of Riverside. He has not presented to me any information documenting to me any specific injuries, in other words, any specific minor strains, as described in the Fruhoff case, that have taken place during the time frame that has been listed that would correlate with this being an industrial injury. It does not appear as if he has filed any previous claims, except for in 2008 to his bilateral upper extremities, nor has he missed any time from work. In other words, there's no disability, not missed any time from work due to some of the other conditions that he discussed. Therefore, it is more likely than not that these incidences would be considered under first aid versus actual work-related injuries. And that makes sense according to what we learned about the differences between first aid and actual, by legal definition, injury in the California workers' compensation system. So he says, therefore, at this time, I do find an industrial injury for the lumbar spine, and he should continue to treat with Dr. Hopkins and on. But he does not find cumulative trauma injury to the neck, the upper or the lower extremities. So the parties proceeded to trial. The issues submitted for decision included the parts of the body injured and the applicant's contention that the report of the qualified medical evaluator did not constitute substantial medical evidence. So at trial, the applicant testified about some of the physical activities related to his job duties as a police officer. He responded to calls, he did patrol in a vehicle. Some of his calls could include robberies, domestic violence or fights, etc. He wore a bullet vest with radio, a gun, ammo, baton. The vest weighed 4 pounds. He wore the vest every day. He was involved in 5 motor vehicle accidents. In other words, he's describing his duties, but he's not describing any incidences of injury. There's no reference to any specific incident of injury. He has been going to a chiropractor for the last 20 years for neck and back pain. Neck and back pain have increased over the years, but it's not clear as to whether or not the neck and back pain is in any way related to the workplace activities, and that was the conclusion of the qualified medical evaluator. He stated that before he was a patrol officer, he did not have pain in his knees, neck, or lower back, and that makes sense because before he was a patrol officer, he was 20 years younger, and we don't typically find widespread difficulties in younger people. So again, there's no specific connection between his symptoms and his work duties as a patrol officer. But the courts saw things a little bit differently. They tell us that it has long been held that a worker's continued exposure to the physical demands of his or her employment may result in a cumulative trauma injury, and that cumulative trauma injuries, and here we're quoting from the Fruhoff case, they are the result of a number of minor strains over a period of time. So it's interesting because Robinson is not reporting any minor strains over a period of time. He doesn't describe a minor strain to his upper extremities or to his knees or even to his neck. He simply describes his workplace duties. Well, again, the court made reference to Labor Code 3208, which involves physically traumatic activities extending over a period of time. And what they concluded with regards to the qualified medical evaluator, they tell us that the qualified medical evaluator's explanation for his opinion that the applicant did not sustain a cumulative trauma injury appears to indicate that the doctor does not accurately understand the legal definition of a cumulative trauma injury. And they don't tell us where the doctor's opinion falls short of the legal definition. Doesn't explain to us how the doctor doesn't accurately understand. They simply tell us that in cases of cumulative trauma injury, the courts tend to opine liberally. They tend to apply liberal construction to favor cumulative trauma injury claims. His opinion appears to be based on an incorrect legal theory and does not constitute substantial evidence. Thus, it is not an appropriate basis for the workers' compensation judge's findings. And the incorrect legal theory seems to be the qualified medical evaluator's statement that Mr. Robinson failed to convince the qualified medical evaluator that he had suffered any specific incidences of injury to the neck, to the upper extremities, to the lower extremities. So the incorrect legal theory is that the opinion for a cumulative trauma injury is not based on any specific incidences of injury. So when you're face to face with your very next examinee who's claiming cumulative trauma injury and they fail to be able to provide you any specific incidences wherein they've suffered either disability and or a need for medical treatment, that does not de facto rule out the possibility that the examinee could be suffering from a legally definable cumulative trauma injury. Finally, they tell us that in the present matter, since the qualified medical evaluator's conclusions regarding the applicant's cumulative trauma claim appear to be based on an inaccurate understanding of the concept of a cumulative injury, a supplemental report from the doctor would likely not be substantial medical evidence. So in this case, it appears that they requested a new evaluator, and this qualified medical evaluator was dismissed from further reporting in the case. So doctors, isn't that fascinating? When you sit down to evaluate your next cumulative trauma injury claim, there are several things that are going to be well known and well established. Number one, you as a qualified medical evaluator are probably going to be evaluating in either Los Angeles or San Diego County, where all of the recent growth in the filing of cumulative trauma injury claims is concentrated. You're likely going to be sitting across the table in the face-to-face interview with an injured worker who has an average weekly wage of less than $500, who in all likelihood is going to be in the manufacturing and or the hospitality industry. Now, cumulative trauma injury claim filings are not isolated to manufacturing and hospitality. They're spread across all sectors, all industry sectors, but most cumulative trauma injury claims are filed by workers with average weekly wages below $500 And there's recent growth, explosive growth actually, in the manufacturing and hospitality industry. So don't be surprised if your examinee tells you about their work in parts assembly, in various aspects of manufacturing or various aspects of hospitality, such as hotel workers and such as perhaps amusement park workers and the like, the hospitality industry. And the injured worker is going to relate to you a series of repetitive strains, either specific repetitive strains or even poorly defined, vaguely recollected incidences of repetitive, physically traumatic activities occurring over a period of time. And if you examine this injured worker, this claimant for a cumulative trauma injury claim, and you find a bona fide diagnosable symptomatic condition of the body part they are alleging to have been involved in a cumulative trauma injury, and in your opinion, that condition, that bona fide diagnosable symptomatic condition, involves either disability and or a need for medical treatment, then that condition can rise to the level of an injury and can even rise to the level of a cumulative trauma injury, an industrially caused cumulative trauma compensable injury, if, in your opinion, those workplace activities, those physically demanding workplace activities over a period of time contribute, they don't have to be the sole cause, but even contribute to a significant degree, don't have to be the sole cause. If you opine and you can, with substantial medical evidence, convey to the parties that the physically demanding workplace activities extending over a period of time contribute to a significant degree to the examinee's bona fide diagnosable symptomatic condition, then that condition can qualify as an industrial cumulative trauma injury, consistent and as demonstrated to us in the Robinson case. So doctors, I hope this helps you. You're going to be flooded over the course of your career with evaluations that involve allegations of cumulative trauma injury claims. And I hope today's concepts allow you some ease and some comfort and some direction when it comes time for you to provide important opinions and conclusions in these growing population of claims. Now, in our next session, I want to talk to you about how to analyze industrial causation even further in the case of an allegation of a cumulative trauma injury claim. So doctors, I hope this helps you, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's discussion. I look forward to being with you on our very next discussion as well, as we continue our new series entitled Cumulative Trauma and the QME. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.